Welcome to Skytech-Lens. Imagine waking up to find your community's future threatened, not by a foreign enemy, but by decisions made far away in your own capital. In several US border towns, a radical idea is taking root, giving up American citizenship to join Canada. Their economies, built on cross-border relationships, have been pushed to the brink by a 35% tariff on Canadian goods. Canada's swift retaliation squeezed the life out of towns that depended on cross-border harmony. Businesses shuttered, unemployment soared, and a deep sense of abandonment set in. This is the story of how a trade war forced loyal citizens to question their own flag. Welcome to Point Roberts, Washington, a U.S. town stranded on a Canadian peninsula. For decades, Point Roberts thrived on Canadian visitors, their economy fueled by cross-border commerce. The 35% tariff was a death sentence. Canadian traffic dried up, businesses collapsed, and isolation became suffocating. Residents lost jobs, savings, and hope. The community felt abandoned by a government that didn't understand their reality. Desperation sparked a radical idea. What if Point Roberts joined Canada? The logic was simple. Geographically and economically, they were already part of Canada. Conversations about petitioning for annexation grew louder. For many, this wasn't about rejecting America, but about survival. The American dream here had died, killed by a tariff. Now, hope pointed north. Would their community even exist in the years to come? In Darby Line, Vermont, the border is a line of tape through the Haskell Free Library. For generations, Darby Line and Stansted, Quebec, were one community. Families, businesses, and lives intertwined. The tariffs and tightened border turned that invisible line into a hard barrier. Daily life fractured, families were separated, businesses lost customers, and trust eroded. The sense of unity was replaced by bureaucracy and suspicion. Economic lifelines vanished overnight. The idea of joining Canada became a serious conversation, not out of disloyalty but to preserve a way of life. Residents saw their reality reflected more in Quebec than in Washington, D.C. The border, once a formality, now threatened their community's existence. For Darby Line, joining Canada became a question of survival, not betrayal. Niagara Falls, New York once thrived on a torrent of Canadian tourists crossing the Rainbow Bridge. For decades, the city's lifeblood was the steady stream of visitors from across the border, drawn by the roaring falls, neon-lit arcades, and the promise of a day's adventure just a short drive from home. The border was more than a line on a map. It was a bridge between two communities, two economies, and countless families with ties on both sides. The city's prosperity depended on this international flow. Hotels, restaurants, and shops relied on Canadian dollars. Every summer, the sidewalks buzzed with laughter and chatter, and local businesses flourished. The economic engine of Niagara Falls was fueled by the simple act of crossing a bridge, and everyone, from hotel owners to street vendors, felt the benefits. But then, the tariffs were a dam. Suddenly, the easy movement of people and money was halted by political decisions made far away. The border, once a symbol of friendship, became a barrier overnight. Overnight, visitors vanished, businesses closed, and jobs disappeared. The once bustling streets grew quiet, and the city's vibrant energy faded. Storefronts that had welcomed generations of tourists now stood empty, their windows dark. The emotional shock was as severe as the economic blow. Families who had built their lives around tourism faced uncertainty and fear. Laid-off workers wondered how they would pay their bills, and longtime residents mourned the loss of the city's spirit. Residents felt like collateral damage in a trade war they never asked for. At community meetings, frustration simmered. People questioned why their livelihoods were sacrificed for political battles they had no part in. Looking across the river at a bustling Canadian side, resentment grew, not toward neighbors, but toward their own government. The contrast was stark. While the Canadian side thrived, the American side struggled to stay afloat. The idea of joining Canada, once unthinkable, became a topic of real discussion. What started as a joke in coffee shops and living rooms soon became a serious question at town halls and city council meetings. People wondered if their future was better aligned with Ontario. Could a new identity bring back prosperity? Was it possible to reclaim the sense of hope that had been lost? The grass genuinely looked greener across the border. Parks were lush, businesses were open, and the sense of community seemed intact. The difference was more than economic. It was a matter of pride and possibility. For a city built on cross-border friendship, switching allegiances started to make sense. The bonds between families and friends had always transcended politics, and now, those connections offered a glimpse of a different future. The question was no longer taboo, it was survival. In Niagara Falls, the debate over identity and belonging was no longer just about economics, it was about hope, dignity, and the right to shape their own destiny. Sault Ste. Marie, Michigan and Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario, known affectionately as the Two Soos, have always been more than just neighbors. For generations, these twin cities have been one community, their lives and destinies intertwined, separated only by the slow-moving St. Mary's River. The border here was never a wall, but a thread that wove together families, friendships, and livelihoods on both sides. The International Bridge, arching gracefully over the water, was a lifeline, an artery pulsing with daily activity. It connected not just roads but hearts and histories, making the border feel almost invisible. Every day residents crossed for work, to shop, to visit family, or simply to enjoy a meal with friends. The bridge was a symbol of unity, a daily reminder that the river was something to be crossed, not something that divided. But then, everything changed. The sudden imposition of tariffs and stricter border controls shattered this delicate balance. What was once a seamless crossing became a source of anxiety and uncertainty. Crossings slowed to a trickle. Canadian shoppers who had once filled local stores and restaurants vanished almost overnight. Local businesses, already operating on thin margins, began to suffer deeply. Downtown storefronts emptied, and the city's economic web unraveled. The once bustling main street grew quiet, and the sense of community began to fray. Local leaders and business owners scrambled to adapt. Shop local campaigns sprang up, and new tourism strategies were launched in hopes of drawing visitors from farther afield. But these efforts, while creative and determined, couldn't fill the void left by lost Canadian commerce. Frustration and worry grew with each passing month. Many began to wonder, did anyone in Washington truly understand their reality? The decisions made in distant halls of power felt disconnected from the daily struggles of border communities like the Soos. The crisis forced a re-examination of identity. Residents found themselves asking what it meant to be from Sault Ste. Marie. Was their bond to their Canadian neighbors stronger than to distant policymakers? For many, the answer was clear. The connection with Canada, built on shared history, culture, and family, felt more real and immediate than any allegiance to far-off capitals. While talk of joining Canada wasn't as loud here as in some other border towns, the question lingered in quiet conversations. Could a government so disconnected from their daily lives truly represent them? The sense of being overlooked was hard to ignore. The Two Soos, once united by a shared river and a shared way of life, now found themselves forced apart by a border that had become hostile and unyielding. Their struggle became a warning, a stark reminder of how fragile border communities can be when national policy ignores local realities. The pain was not just economic, but deeply personal. National policy had local, human consequences. Behind every empty storefront and every lost job was a family, a dream, a story interrupted. Yet even in hardship, the people of Sault Ste. Marie showed resilience. They supported each other, rebuilt where they could, and held on to hope that one day, the bridge would once again unite rather than divide. The story of the Two Soos is a testament to the enduring strength of community, and a cautionary tale for us all. Blaine, Washington, known as the Peace Arch City, was built on open gates and the promise of cross-border commerce. For decades, this small town thrived as a living symbol of international friendship, its identity shaped by the steady rhythm of people and goods flowing freely between the United States and Canada. The Peace Arch itself, standing tall at the border, was more than just a monument. It was a daily reminder that cooperation could triumph over division. Canadians flocked here for gas, groceries, and mailbox services, fueling the local economy. On weekends, the streets buzzed with shoppers from Vancouver, their cars filling parking lots and their dollars supporting local businesses. For many in Blaine, these cross-border visitors weren't just customers. They were neighbors, friends, and the lifeblood of the community. But when tariffs hit and border restrictions tightened, everything changed. The once busy border crossing fell eerily silent, and the impact was immediate and severe. The steady flow of Canadian shoppers dried up almost overnight. Businesses that had depended on cross-border trade for survival were forced to close their doors, and unemployment soared as jobs vanished. Blaine's economic identity, once vibrant and outward-looking, was erased in a matter of weeks. The town's main street, once bustling with activity, became a row of empty storefronts and silent sidewalks. The city scrambled to reinvent itself, holding emergency meetings and brainstorming new ways to survive. But the loss was too great. and the solutions too few. Residents watched as their livelihoods slipped away, powerless to stop the decline. Many felt abandoned, sacrificed by their own government in a conflict they never asked for. Just across the border, Vancouver continued to thrive, its skyline a daily reminder of what Blaine had lost. The Peace Arch's promise, "May these gates never be closed," now rang hollow. The monument, once a beacon of hope, stood watch over an empty park and a community in crisis. While talk of joining Canada wasn't organized, the sentiment was real. In diners and town halls, residents quietly wondered if their future might be brighter on the other side of the border. Blaine became a living monument to the disconnect between national policy and local reality, a place where decisions made in distant capitals had devastating consequences for ordinary people. The economic wall was invisible, but its effects were everywhere, devastating businesses, families, and the very spirit of the town. The city was left stranded, a stark warning to all who ignore the complexities and human costs of border life. Blaine's story is a reminder that borders are not just lines on a map, they are lifelines for entire communities. Here, at the ground zero of the trade war, the human cost was impossible to ignore, and the scars may last for generations. The stories of Point Roberts Derby Line, Niagara Falls, and Sault Ste. Marie and Blaine are not isolated incidents, but part of a larger pattern. They reveal a deeper truth. For many border communities, ties to Canada are often stronger than those to their own country. The idea of joining Canada has become a symbol of both abandonment and desperation. Borders are living, breathing ecosystems, not just lines on a map. When distant policymakers disrupt these delicate ecosystems, they tear at the fabric of trust and community. A nation is only as strong as its most vulnerable edges, and when those edges fray, the whole tapestry is truly at risk. Thanks for watching. Subscribe the channel now for more updates.